Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, A Most Curious Theft. The train from London had rattled pleasantly along its course through the Midlands, leaving behind the bustle of the city and carrying Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings into gentler countryside. Outside their carriage window, hedgerows scrolled past like pages in a green book, broken here and there by the white spire of a village church or the orderly rows of a farmer's fields. The September air, crisp and clean, seemed to put Hastings in excellent spirits. A proper English autumn, eh, Poirot? Hastings said cheerily, leaning forward in his seat. I dare say the apples in Lady Winthrop's orchards will be ripe for picking. Quite a treat to be invited, what? One could do with a change after the smoke of town. Poirot, compact and impeccable in a dark suit with the faintest sheen to the cloth, raised his eyebrows and adjusted his moustaches with delicate precision. "My OUI, Hastings. The air here is indeed fresh, though I cannot allow myself to be distracted by apples. What interests me is the character of Lady Winthrop herself. A widow of wealth, a collector of rare objects, and a hostess of no mean reputation. It will be most instructive to observe her household." Hastings chuckled. "Always observing, Poirot. I expect you'll find some puzzle where none exists." Poirot permitted himself a small smile. "One never knows, mon ami. Human beings, they bring with them the drama, even into the quiet of the countryside. And when drama comes, so too must the truth." By the time they alighted at the modest station of Stourbridge, evening shadows were lengthening across the platform. A motorcar bearing Lady Winthrop's crest awaited them, and soon they were conveyed through winding lanes until at last the great house appeared, Winthrop Hall, a grand yet homely estate of mellow stone, ivy-clad and dignified. Lady Winthrop herself received them in the long drawing-room. She was a tall woman of regal bearing, her silver hair arranged with care, her eyes bright though shadowed with fatigue. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said warmly, extending her hand. "How very kind of you to come. I know you must have countless demands upon your time, yet you indulge an old woman with your company." "Madam," Poirot replied with a bow, "the pleasure is entirely ours. To breathe your English country air, that is health itself. And to see the treasures of your house, that is a privilege." At this, Lady Winthrop's face lit with genuine pride. She led them through to the study, a stately chamber lined with shelves of calf-bound books, portraits of ancestors, and cabinets of curiosities. But all these faded beside the object that dominated the far wall, a magnificent clock, tall as a man, gleaming with polished walnut and gilded brass. "There, gentlemen," Lady Winthrop announced, "behold my dearest possession, the horologe of Orleans. Crafted in France in 1672, carried across Europe by a duke, and finally settled here with my late husband's family. It plays a melody on the hour, as sweet as any chamber music." Poirot approached with reverence, his head cocked slightly as he examined the artistry. "Magnifique," he breathed. "The proportions are perfect, the craftsmanship, exquisite. A timepiece, yes, but also a poem in wood and metal. It is clear, madam, that it brings you joy." "It does more than that, Monsieur Poirot," Lady Winthrop said softly. "It reminds me of my husband. He adored this clock, spent hours ensuring its mechanism was wound precisely, never allowing dust to settle upon it. Since his passing, I have cared for it as he would wish." Hastings, though less moved by old clocks, admitted its grandeur. "Quite something, I must say. Worth a tidy sum, I expect." Lady Winthrop's expression grew guarded. "A great deal more than tidy, Captain Hastings. Experts from London have valued it at £250,000. but to me, its worth is not in money." Poirot, ever sensitive, inclined his head. "I understand perfectly, madam. It is the sentiment, the memory, that makes it priceless." The evening passed with gentle conversation and an excellent dinner in the great hall. They met the household, Lady Winthrop's nephew Roland, a handsome young man with a restless manner, Clara Vane, the secretary, quietly efficient with eyes that darted too quickly, Edmund Blakely, a visiting acquaintance and dealer in antiques, whose smooth words and knowledge of artifacts were only slightly too polished, and Mrs. Dawes, the housekeeper, stern as a governess and as watchful as a hawk. Hastings, content with good wine, scarcely noticed the undercurrents. Poirot, however, observed all. Roland's hand trembled when the port was poured, Clara blushed when spoken to directly, Blakely's gaze lingered on the clock each time it was mentioned, and Mrs. Dawes listened intently though she seldom spoke. At length, Lady Winthrop rose. "Tomorrow I shall show you the gardens, Monsieur Poirot. Tonight, however, you must forgive me, I retire early." One by one, the household dispersed, and silence settled upon Winthrop Hall. The following morning, silence was broken by a cry. Poirot and Hastings, summoned by the commotion, hastened to the study. There, pale and trembling, stood Lady Winthrop. The space where the great horologe had stood was bare. Only a rectangle of lighter-colored carpet and a scattering of dust marked its absence. "It is gone!" Lady Winthrop gasped. "My clock, stolen in the night!" Poirot's gaze sharpened instantly. He crossed the room, kneeling to examine the floor with precise care. His fingertips brushed faint impressions in the carpet pile. He stood, eyes narrowing upon the unbroken windows, the locked door, the untouched desk. "Curious," he murmured. "No sign of force, no sound heard in the night, and yet the horologe, an object of great weight, has vanished as though spirited away." Hastings exclaimed, "Good Lord, Poirot! Whoever took it must have had accomplices, and a lorry to cart the thing off." Poirot did not reply at once. Instead, he surveyed the room, his grey-green eyes alive with calculation. At last he turned to Lady Winthrop, who clutched a handkerchief to her lips. "Be assured, madam," he said gravely, "your horologe has not vanished into thin air. It has been stolen, yes, but all theft leaves its trace. You have asked Hercule Poirot for aid, and aid you shall have. Already, I perceive the first shadows of truth." He tapped the floor lightly with his cane, then drew himself up, immaculate and composed. "The thief has been clever, Hastings," he added, "but perhaps, just perhaps, not clever enough." And so it began, the curious case of the stolen clock, which was to test Hercule Poirot's little grey cells in ways most unexpected. Chapter 2. The Household Under Suspicion. The disappearance of the horologe of Orleans threw Winthrop Hall into a state of nervous agitation. Servants whispered in corners, doors were closed with greater force than usual, and Lady Winthrop, though she strove for composure, could not hide the tremor in her hands as she presided over breakfast the morning after the theft. Hastings ate heartily enough, kidneys, eggs, and toast, but he confessed to Poirot in a low voice, "Dashed awkward business, old chapter. A monstrous heavy clock like that doesn't just walk off. Whoever took it must have been devilishly clever." Poirot, who had contented himself with coffee and a single croissant he had insisted upon bringing from London, dabbed his lips with a napkin and lowered his voice. "Mon ami, you are correct. The removal of so great an object required not only strength but also opportunity, planning, and above all, access. For such a theft, strangers are unlikely. None, it is within the household that we must look." "Dash it all," Hastings muttered, glancing about. "You don't mean to say it's one of them?" Lady Winthrop would be appalled. Poirot raised a finger. "Sure, Hastings. We must not distress Madame unnecessarily. But observe, the thief had knowledge of the locks, the keys, the habits of the household. Who else but those within these walls? Lady Winthrop herself broke into their quiet exchange. Monsieur Poirot, I beg you, question whoever you must. I cannot bear to think ill of my staff or family, but I must know the truth. Please, leave no stone unturned. Poirot bowed. You have my word, madam. The truth shall not remain hidden. Roland Winthrop. The first to be interviewed was Lady Winthrop's nephew, Roland. He entered the study reluctantly, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his eyes avoiding Poirot's keen gaze. He was a young man of striking good looks, though slightly marred by the tiredness under his eyes and a certain twitchiness in his manner. Roland, Lady Winthrop said firmly, Monsieur Poirot wishes to ask you some questions. Answer honestly. Of course, Aunt, Roland muttered, dropping into a chair. Poirot folded his hands neatly. Monsieur, you were absent from the hall last night. Roland hesitated. Yes. I went into the village. Had a game of billiards at the public house. Until what hour? midnight, perhaps a little later. And you returned alone? Yes. Everyone was abed, I think. Poirot's eyes rested on him for a moment. You have debts, do you not? Roland flushed. What makes you say that? Poirot smiled slightly. A man's shoes tell much, monsieur. Yours are of excellent quality, yet worn thin at the soles, not replaced as they should be. A gentleman with fortune is seldom so neglectful. And I heard you speaking last night of a certain bookmaker in Birmingham. Roland shifted uncomfortably. Very well, yes, I owe a little. Nothing serious. Poirot inclined his head. A little debt can become a heavy weight, n'est-ce pas? Thank you, monsieur. That is all for now. Roland left in haste, muttering. Clara Vane. Next came Clara Vane, the secretary. She was a slim young woman of 30, her brown hair pulled tightly back, her spectacles giving her an efficient air. Yet she clasped her notebook too firmly, and her voice betrayed a nervous tremor. Mademoiselle, Poirot began kindly, you have worked here how long? 6 years, Monsieur Poirot. And you hold the duplicate key to the study? Yes, Lady Winthrop entrusts me with it for correspondence and accounts. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Tell me, at what hour did you retire last night? A little after 10. I was unwell, with a headache. Ah, but the maid who attends your fire tells a different tale. She found a candle stub in your room, burned past midnight. Clara's hands tightened on her notebook. I could not sleep. I read. Is that so suspicious? Suspicious? None. But curious. And I notice also, upon your glove there, a faint fray of green velvet. Did you know, mademoiselle, a scrap of such fabric was found in the study? Her face blanched. I cannot explain that. Perhaps in time, you will. Poirot's tone was gentle but firm. For now, I thank you. Clara hurried out, visibly shaken. Edmund Blakely. The third to appear was Edmund Blakely, the visiting antique dealer. Tall, with sleek dark hair and a manner polished as glass, he carried himself with unflappable calm. He bowed courteously to Poirot. You must forgive me, Monsieur Poirot, he said smoothly, if I appear to relish this little drama. A theft of so fine an artifact is most intriguing. Indeed, Poirot replied evenly. You are a man of knowledge in such matters, monsieur. You spoke last night of the clock's great value. Tell me, if one wished to sell it, how should one proceed? Blakely smiled faintly. Why, discreetly, of course. Only a handful of collectors could pay such a sum, and all transactions would require secrecy. but to move such an item without attracting attention? Difficult, very difficult. Yet not impossible. Poirot watched him closely. And where were you during the hours of darkness? In my chamber, writing letters. I retire early. The servants will tell you I asked for hot water at 10:30, and after that I was not seen. Poirot inclined his head. A most satisfactory alibi. Yet still, monsieur, you show much interest in the horror lodge. One might almost call it professional admiration. Quite so. Though admiration is not the same as theft. Blakely's calm never wavered as he departed. Hastings muttered, "Smooth fellow." Too smooth, if you ask me. Mrs. Dawes. Lastly came Mrs. Dawes, the housekeeper. A solid woman with iron-grey hair and a severe expression, she sat upright, her hands folded in her lap. "Madam," Poirot began, "you have served the family many years." "Since before Lady Winthrop was married, sir." "Near on 30 years. Loyal service indeed." "And last night, you slept soundly." "Yes, sir." "I heard nothing." Yet Poirot had spoken quietly with the housemaid earlier, who whispered that Mrs. Dawes had been seen near the study after midnight. Poirot now studied the housekeeper's face keenly. "Curious," he said mildly. "Others place you near the study in the night." Mrs. Dawes's lips tightened. "I walked the corridor before bed, sir, to be sure the lamps were out. That is my duty. Nothing more." Poirot gave no sign of disbelief. "Very proper, madam. That will be all." When all had been questioned, Poirot and Hastings withdrew to their guest chamber. Hastings looked bewildered. "Well, dash it all, Poirot, each of them might have done it. Roland with his debts, Clara with her key, Blakely with his knowledge, Mrs. Dawes prowling the corridors. I can't make head or tail of it." Poirot smiled faintly, arranging his cufflinks. "That, mon ami, is because the picture is incomplete. We have seen the pieces, yes, but not yet the pattern they form. For now, we wait, we watch, and we think. The truth will come, but it will not be obvious." He tapped his temple lightly. "Remember, Hastings, the thief hides not only the clock, but also his heart. And the heart, it always betrays." Chapter 3, The Locked Study. The morning after his initial interviews, Hercule Poirot requested that he and Hastings be left alone in the study where the great horror lodge had once stood. Lady Winthrop, still pale with distress, agreed at once, though she lingered in the doorway as if unwilling to part with the empty space. "Do as you must, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "Only, do not be too long. I find the sight of that bare carpet unbearable." Poirot inclined his head. "Courage, madam. The void speaks as loudly as the object that filled it. Leave us, and we shall listen." When she had gone, Poirot stood for several moments without moving, his hands clasped neatly behind his back, eyes half closed. Hastings shifted impatiently. "Well, Poirot, where do we begin?" "There's nothing to see, is there? The thief has taken every blessed thing." Poirot opened his eyes. "You contraire, Hastings. There is everything to see. The thief has removed the clock, yes, but in so doing, he has left behind the story of his actions. Regard, mon ami. Regard with the little grey cells. The carpet." Poirot knelt delicately beside the patch of carpet where the horror lodge had stood. The pile was pressed flat, a rectangle clearly outlined in lighter shade. He brushed the fibers gently with his fingertips. "Observe the indentations, Hastings. The weight of centuries pressed here, and yet, see how the impressions are softened, almost blurred." Hastings crouched beside him. "Well, naturally. The thing was lifted out, wasn't it?" Poirot shook his head. Not lifted, mon cher, but eased. The thief placed something beneath the cabinet, perhaps padding of felt, to prevent noise and to slide it gently. A man who acts in haste does not think of silence. Here, we see care, forethought. The thief is no bungler. Could have been Blakely, then, Hastings muttered. He'd know how to handle antiques without damaging them. Poirot only smiled enigmatically. The windows. Poirot rose and examined the tall windows that overlooked the gardens. He tested the locks with a precise touch. Bolted from within, unbroken, he murmured. No intruder forced an entry here. Hastings frowned. So the thief must have come through the door. Yet that was locked, too, wasn't it? Lady Winthrop swears she locked it before retiring. Poirot nodded slowly. Exactment. Therefore, only one with a key could enter. And who has such a key? Clara Vane, Hastings said at once. And Lady Winthrop herself, Poirot added softly. Never forget, Hastings, possession of a key is both necessity and danger. It opens the way, yes, but also points the finger of suspicion. The desk. Poirot next moved to Lady Winthrop's writing desk. It stood slightly open, one drawer ajar. He bent close, his nose nearly touching the polished wood. Dust, disturbed. Papers shifted. And here, he extracted a tiny scrap caught in the drawer's corner. A thread of green velvet, scarcely more than a sliver. Hastings peered. Good Lord, Poirot, that must match the fray you noticed on Clara's gloves. Poirot laid the thread gently in a small envelope. Perhaps, Hastings. Or perhaps it is a trick, planted to deceive us. The green velvet could come from elsewhere. We must not leap. He replaced the drawer carefully. But take note, the thief opened this desk. Why? The object of value was the clock, not the papers. Unless the thief sought to disguise his true purpose by rifling here also. Or unless, Poirot paused. Unless there is some hidden connection we do not yet see. The smell of oil. Poirot paced the room slowly, inhaling through his nose. Suddenly he stopped, crouched again, and touched the floorboards near the wall. They're faint, but present. The smell of oil. Hastings sniffed, baffled. Can't say I smell anything. You are not trained, Hastings. This is oil of the clock's mechanism, a very particular odor. Yet why should it be here, on the boards, some distance from where the horror lodge stood? Hastings shook his head. Perhaps it leaked. None. The clock was well tended, I am certain. No, Hastings, this suggests the mechanism was handled, perhaps tampered with, before removal. Someone worked upon the clock in this very room. The locked door. At last, Poirot turned to the heavy oak door. He examined the lock minutely, producing from his pocket a small magnifying glass. After several moments, he straightened. The lock has not been forced. No scratches, no bruising. A key was used. That is beyond doubt. Hastings groaned. So it must be Clara. She had the duplicate. Poirot raised a finger. Again, you jump. She had the key. But so too did Lady Winthrop. And who can say whether a third copy was not made, quietly, by one who had access? We must be exact, mon ami. Precision only will reveal the truth. Poirot's reflection. When their inspection was complete, Poirot stood in the center of the room, his small form very still, moustaches bristling. Hastings watched him with curiosity. Well, Poirot, what do you make of it? Poirot's voice was soft, thoughtful. It is a crime of subtlety. Not brute force, but care. Not passion, but calculation. The thief took pains to leave no noise, no broken lock, no shattered window. Yet still, small traces remain, the indentations in the carpet, the velvet thread, the whiff of oil. Each is a note in a melody, Hastings. And when all the notes are gathered, we shall hear the tune entire. Hastings sighed. I must say, it seems dashed puzzling. If you ask me, it's Blakely. Knows too much about antiques, and too smooth by half. Poirot smiled indulgently. Perhaps, perhaps. But remember, Hastings, the smoothness may be genuine, or it may be a disguise. We must not yet close the book. We have only read the first chapter. Lady Winthrop returns. At that moment Lady Winthrop reappeared, her face anxious. Monsieur Poirot, have you discovered anything? Please, do not spare me. Poirot took her hand with gallantry. Madam, I have discovered only that the thief is most careful. But rest assured, Hercule Poirot will find what is concealed. For though the clock is heavy, the truth is light. It cannot be hidden forever. She managed a faint smile. You give me hope. Pray God you are right. Poirot's private observation. Later, as they walked the gravel paths of the garden, Hastings pressed again. You really think it was someone in the house, don't you? Poirot looked out across the lawns, where the autumn sun cast long golden beams. But of course, Hastings. An outsider could not know the key, the habits, the silence. None, the thief is here, among us, walking calmly, speaking politely. That is the true puzzle. He paused, tapping his temple lightly. But remember, when one removes such a treasure, one must also find a place to conceal it. And concealment leaves traces. Already, I begin to see where those traces may lead. Hastings stared. You don't mean you already have an idea? Poirot only smiled, his eyes glinting. Patience, mon ami. The time will come. For now, we let the shadows deepen. Then, when all are most at ease, Hercule Poirot shall strike. The great house loomed behind them, its windows blank, its corridors filled with whispers. Somewhere within those walls, the horologe of Orleans still ticked in silence, hidden, waiting. And Poirot, with his little grey cells, was already listening for its echo. Chapter 4: The Motives and Alibis. The following day dawned grey and unsettled, the skies low with heavy clouds. It seemed to Hastings that even the weather had taken on the mood of Winthrop Hall. Servants moved in hushed tones, doors closed softly as though the house itself held its breath. Lady Winthrop, though striving for dignity, appeared pale and weary at breakfast. She barely touched her tea, leaving Poirot and Hastings to their conversation while she excused herself early. Poirot tapped his spoon lightly against his cup. It is time, Hastings, to arrange our facts. Already we have observed the scene of the crime, now we must weigh the hearts of those around us. For each has his or her alibi, and each conceals a motive. Motives! Hastings exclaimed. You've seen more in this than I, Poirot. I can only make out Roland and his dashed gambling debts. Poirot gave a tiny shrug. Let us not underestimate the complexity of human nature, mon ami. A man gambles for money, yes, but a woman may steal for love, a servant for loyalty or resentment, and a guest for greed. We must examine all. Roland Winthrop. Poirot chose to begin with Roland once again. He summoned the young man to the library, where the fire burned low against the chill of the morning. Roland entered with his usual nervous energy, pacing even before Poirot asked a question. Look here, Monsieur Poirot, you've no right to drag me in like a criminal. I told you, I was in the village. Poirot raised a hand, calm as ever. Sit, monsieur, and we shall not quarrel. You say you were at the public house. Tell me, who saw you there? Roland scowled. Half the village, for all I know. I played billiards with a fellow named Carter. He'll vouch for me. Bon. And you returned when? Past midnight. Poirot leaned forward. You have debts, Roland. Large debts. Do not deny it. Is it not true that the sale of such a clock could have satisfied them? Roland flushed hotly. Perhaps. But I'd never steal from my aunt. She's done more for me than anyone. I'd rather face the devil than betray her. Poirot's gaze softened for a moment. Sometimes, monsieur, desperation leads a man to betray even those he loves. I do not accuse, I merely consider. Roland pushed back his chair and stalked out, muttering under his breath. Clara Vane. Next came Clara Vane, her notebook in hand, though she scarcely looked at it. Her composure was brittle, like glass under strain. Mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, you worked late on the night of the theft. Clara's lips pressed together. I could not sleep. I wrote letters. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps to a suitor. She looked startled. How did you? Ah, mademoiselle, one sees much. A blush when romance is mentioned, the candle burned low though you claim to retire early. The little grey cells, they put two and two together. Was it he who urged you toward money, perhaps? Her hands trembled on the notebook. He is in difficulties, she whispered. I wanted to help. But I would never, never, steal the clock. Poirot's eyes lingered. Yet you had the key. And love, mademoiselle, can drive one to foolishness. Think on that. Tears glistened, though she turned quickly and left the room without another word. Edmund Blakely. Blakely arrived next, composed as always. He smiled, bowing with faint amusement. Monsieur Poirot, am I to be cross-examined once more? I assure you, my conscience is quite untroubled. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Indeed? Yet you spoke admiringly of the horologe's value. To a man in your profession, such a piece is temptation itself. Blakely spread his hands. True, it would fetch a remarkable sum. But I trade honestly. Were I to dabble in stolen goods, my reputation would be ruined. Nevertheless, Poirot said softly, last evening you wrote a letter. Its words included secure passage for item and a discreet sale assured. Do not deny it, I saw with my own eyes. Blakely stiffened, then smiled again, though less easily. You are sharp, Monsieur Poirot. But that letter concerned a different matter, a set of silver candlesticks I am arranging for a client abroad. I may show you the correspondence, if you insist. Poirot regarded him for a long moment. Perhaps I shall, monsieur. For now, I leave you with this thought, a man who deals in treasures knows too well how to conceal one. Blakely bowed and departed without fluster. Hastings muttered, slippery as an eel, that one. Mrs. Dawes. At last Poirot called for Mrs. Dawes, the housekeeper. She came stiffly, her face set in lines of granite. Madam, Poirot said politely, you are long in service to Lady Winthrop. Loyal, yes. 30 years, sir. I'd sooner cut off my hand than harm her. Poirot nodded. And yet, the housemaid saw you near the study late that night. Mrs. Dawes drew herself up. I made my rounds, as always. I saw all was well and went to bed. Is that a crime? Poirot smiled faintly. Not a crime, perhaps. But tell me, you love this house, do you not? She glanced around, her eyes softening despite herself. It is my life, monsieur. Then answer me this: if Lady Winthrop, in her grief, were to sell the clock, would you approve? A flicker of emotion passed across the stern face. No, sir. That clock belongs here. It was Mr. Winthrop's pride. To part with it would be unforgivable. Poirot inclined his head, filing the response away in his mind. Poirot's meditation. Later, in their shared chamber, Hastings threw up his hands. Well, Poirot, they all have motives of a sort. Roland with his debts, Clara with her mysterious suitor, Blakely with his trade, and Mrs. Dawes with her devotion. But it's a dash muddle. How do you tell who's lying? Poirot sat serenely, polishing his shoes with a cloth. By psychology, Hastings. Each one speaks, and their words betray them. Consider, Roland defends his aunt's honor, yet desperation lurks in his eyes. Clara trembles with love and secrecy. Blakely cloaks himself in calm, yet writes letters too carefully phrased. And Mrs. Dawes, she guards the memory of her master more fiercely than her mistress suspects. Hastings groaned. So which is it? Who took the clock? Poirot looked up, his eyes gleaming. Patience, mon ami. The truth is not yet ripe. But I tell you this, the thief is not careless. He leaves red herrings, distractions, illusions. Already, he tries to lead us astray. That broken latch on the garden gate, the rumors of Roland's pawning heirlooms, PFF. All designed to mislead. Hastings stared. Do you mean, someone in the house deliberately planted those things? Poirot nodded. Just so. And when we discover who plays at misdirection, we shall have our thief. The gathering storm. That evening, thunder rumbled across the hills. Candles were lit early, their flames flickering against the high ceilings of Winthrop Hall. Poirot, seated in the drawing room, gazed into the shadows. Each alibi, Hastings, is like a card in a game. Alone, it means little. But when we see how the cards are arranged, the trick is revealed. Already I begin to perceive the shape. Hastings looked at him anxiously. Do you know, Poirot? Do you really? Poirot smiled, smoothing his immaculate moustaches. Not yet, mon ami. But soon. Very soon. The storm broke outside, rain lashing against the windows, as though the heavens themselves echoed the turmoil within Winthrop Hall. And somewhere in the house, concealed with cunning hands, the great horologe of Orleans waited for discovery. Chapter 5: The Red Herrings. The storm had passed in the night, leaving Winthrop Hall washed clean by rain. Yet though the skies cleared, the air inside the great house remained heavy with unease. Hastings remarked at breakfast, "It's the dashed silence of the place, Poirot. Everyone tiptoeing about, whispering as though they're guilty of something. It puts a fellow on edge." Poirot stirred his coffee delicately. "Mais oui, Hastings. Suspicion is a contagion. Once it enters a household, it spreads from room to room. Each man suspects his neighbor, each woman defends herself too quickly. It is most revealing." He tapped the table lightly. "Today we look for the misdirections, the red herrings. For a clever thief will not simply steal, he will also distract." The broken gate. Their first discovery came that morning when the gardener, a weathered man in corduroy trousers, approached Lady Winthrop with cap in hand. "Beg pardon, my lady, but I thought you ought to know, one of the latches on the south gate's been broken clean off. Looks like someone forced it in the night." Hastings brightened. "There you are, Poirot. That explains everything. Some fellow from outside must have slipped in, forced the gate, and made off with the clock." Poirot walked with Hastings and the gardener to inspect the gate. It hung crookedly on its hinges, the iron latch twisted, splintered wood around the fastening. Looks like it was wrenched with a crowbar, Hastings said, satisfied. Poirot bent close, studying the break. But note, Hastings, the splinters are bright and fresh, not weathered. And the tool marks are crude, as though made in haste. He straightened, his eyes twinkling. This was done yesterday, after the theft. A false clue, planted to suggest an intruder. Hastings blinked. You mean it's a sham? Exactment. The true thief wished us to believe the clock was carried out by strangers. But no stranger would know the locked study, the keys, the habits of the household. No, no. This is but a stage prop in the play. The pawned heirlooms. That afternoon, gossip from the village reached Poirot's ears. A maid confided in Hastings that Roland Winthrop had been seen attempting to sell family heirlooms in Birmingham only days before the theft. Roland again! Hastings exclaimed when he repeated the tale to Poirot. It fits perfectly, his drowning in debt, pawning the family silver, and when that's not enough, he turns his eye to the horror lodge. Open and shut, if you ask me. Poirot merely raised an eyebrow. You leap too eagerly, mon ami. Let us confirm before we condemn. He sent a discreet telegram, and by evening had the reply in hand. He read it, then smiled faintly. As I suspected. Roland did sell items, but weeks ago, and openly, with receipts and his aunt's knowledge. They were trinkets of little worth, approved for sale to cover his living expenses. The gossip twists the truth to make it darker. Hastings groaned. Then it's not Roland, after all. Poirot folded the telegram carefully. It is not so simple. Roland's debts remain, his desperation is real. But the story of the pawning is another red herring, whether by chance or design. The vanishing footprints. Poirot next requested a search of the grounds, particularly around the cellar and outbuildings. Several of the servants, led by the butler, examined the damp earth left by the rain. They reported excitedly that a set of muddy footprints led partway across the lawn behind the house, as though something heavy had been dragged toward the stables. But the trail ended abruptly, vanishing on the gravel drive. Hastings, hearing this, slapped his knee. There it is. Proof positive that the thief dragged the clock outside. The trail shows it as clear as daylight. Poirot walked the path himself, his small patent leather shoes leaving neat imprints. He knelt, examined the muddy tracks, then stood, frowning. None, Hastings. Look again. The footprints are too regular, too neat, as though placed deliberately. A man dragging a weight of such size would leave irregular scuffs, crushed grass, deep furrows. These prints are staged, not natural. He pointed to the gravel where the trail ended. And here, Hastings, the prints cease entirely. Not fade, cease. A magician's trick. One moment, the thief drags a clock, the next, the trail vanishes. Do you see? It is not evidence, it is theatre. The suspicion of Blakely. That evening, suspicion fell heavily upon Edmund Blakely once more. One of the footmen whispered to Hastings that Blakely had asked probing questions of the servants about access to the wine cellar and the locked pantries. When Hastings reported this to Poirot, he was triumphant. Now I've got him. Why should Blakely care about cellars and pantries unless he's searching for a hiding place? Poirot considered. It is possible, Hastings. But remember, Blakely is a dealer, a man who lives by curiosity. To him, every corner of a house is of interest. And yet, he tapped his moustache thoughtfully. To draw such attention to oneself is hardly the act of a cautious thief. Again, perhaps, we are being invited to suspect him. Hastings threw up his hands. But dash it all, Poirot, if everything's a trick, how do we ever find the truth? Poirot's eyes gleamed. by seeing which clues harmonize, Hastings. Red herrings swim alone, making much splash. But the true clue, it is quiet, modest, easily overlooked. That is the one we must seek. Lady Winthrop's distress. Late that night, Poirot found Lady Winthrop sitting alone in the darkened drawing room. Her hands rested on her lap, a small photograph of her late husband between them. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I cannot endure it. The house feels empty without the clock. I cannot rid myself of the thought that it may be gone forever." Poirot bowed his head. "Courage, madam. It is not gone forever. I promise you this. Already, I see the game being played. The thief has scattered shadows, a broken gate, a false trail, rumors in the village. But shadows cannot conceal substance. The horror lodge is still here." Her eyes widened. "Here?" "Within the hall." Poirot smiled gently. "But of course. To move it outside unnoticed would be near impossible. The thief hides it close at hand, waiting for the moment to complete his plan. Rest assured, Madame, Hercule Poirot shall unmask him." Poirot's quiet reflection. When Hastings joined him later in their chamber, he found Poirot seated neatly at the small writing table, polishing his pince-nez. "Well, Poirot," Hastings said, "you've made short work of half the evidence. Everything I thought convincing turns out to be rot. What's left, then?" Poirot looked up, eyes alight. "What is left, mon ami, are the small truths. The velvet thread, the smell of oil, the careful padding on the carpet. They are not loud, not dramatic, but they are genuine. These, not the red herrings, will guide us." Hastings shook his head. "You the patience of Job. I'd have arrested Blakely on the spot." Poirot chuckled softly. "And that, Hastings, is why you are the brave soldier, and I am the little detective." He turned off the lamp with precision. "Bourne knew it, mon ami. Tomorrow, perhaps, another shadow will fall away." The house sank into silence once more, but somewhere within its walls the great clock still waited, hidden by cunning hands, its absence disguised by lies and illusions. And Poirot, with his unerring little grey cells, was following the faint glimmer of truth through the darkness. Chapter 6: The Unexpected Discovery. The following morning broke clear and cool, with a light mist hanging over the lawns of Winthrop Hall. Hastings, after his customary hearty breakfast, remarked that the place seemed more cheerful now the storm had passed. Poirot, however, appeared deep in thought, his gaze fixed on the silver toast rack as though it concealed the answer to the mystery. "Mon ami," he said at last, "today we shall abandon the red herrings. They are many, they are noisy, and they weary me. Instead, we follow the smallest of details, the quiet whisper that others ignore." Hastings buttered his toast. "Well, if you ask me, Poirot, it's not details we need, it's a solid lead. The thief can't have vanished into thin air with a great clock, after all." Poirot smiled faintly. "Precisely, Hastings. A clock of such size does not vanish. Therefore it is still here. The question is, where? The cellar door." Later that morning, Poirot requested a tour of the lower parts of the house. The butler, dignified though faintly scandalized, obliged. Together with Hastings, they descended to the vaulted cellars, long passages lined with racks of wine bottles, barrels, and dusty crates. Poirot paused at once, crouching by the cellar door. "Regard, Hastings. Do you see the faint scratches around the lock?" Hastings bent down. "By Jove, yes. Someone's been tampering with it. Do you suppose the thief forced his way in?" None. It was not forced. Merely opened with clumsy haste, perhaps by someone unused to keys. You observe the faint smear of oil also? Someone has greased the lock recently. Why should that be, unless they wish to use it without squeaking? The butler cleared his throat nervously. I assure you, sir, the cellars are rarely disturbed save by myself. The wine is secure. Poirot's eyes twinkled. I do not doubt it, monsieur. Yet I suspect these cellars conceal more than vintage port. The empty crate. They explored the passages, Poirot's polished shoes clicking softly on the stone. Dust lay thick in corners, cobwebs drooped from beams, yet here and there the dust had been disturbed, swept aside by recent movement. Someone's been here, Poirot, Hastings whispered excitedly. Poirot nodded, his moustaches bristling. He stopped before a stack of wooden crates stamped with foreign lettering. One stood slightly askew. With a delicate hand, Poirot lifted the lid. Inside lay nothing but a few scraps of straw. An empty crate, Hastings said, puzzled. What of it? Poirot tapped the wood with his knuckle. Hastings, my friend, do you not see? The size of this crate, the strength of it, it would serve perfectly to conceal the horologe. Hastings gaped. Good heavens, you think the clock is in one of these crates? Poirot smiled. Perhaps. Or perhaps it was, briefly, before being shifted again. Observe, this crate is lighter than its fellows. It has been moved, hidden amongst the others, then emptied. Someone is playing a game of hide and seek. The scent of varnish. As Poirot bent closer, he sniffed the air lightly. There is also a faint scent here, a varnish, or fresh polish. Did you notice, Hastings? Hastings sniffed doubtfully. Can't say I did. Smells musty to me. Poirot straightened. Ah, but to the trained nose, even in the mustiness one catches a trace of something recent. A wooden object, freshly touched with varnish, has been here. He dusted his hands fastidiously. The horologe, Hastings, was no doubt hidden here, disguised or prepared in some way. But where is it now? That, we must discover. Blakely cornered. They returned upstairs to find Edmund Blakely awaiting them in the hall, leaning elegantly upon his cane. Ah, gentlemen, he said smoothly. I trust you enjoyed your excursion underground? The cellars are rather fine, are they not? Poirot's gaze sharpened. You knew where we had gone, monsieur. Blakely's smile broadened. Merely a guess. You have the look of men who follow shadows, and the cellars are full of them. Poirot studied him for a long moment, then said quietly, You are interested in shadows, monsieur. Tell me, did you visit those cellars last night? Blakely's brow lifted in polite amusement. Really, Poirot, you go too far. I am a guest here, not a burglar. I retired to my room early, perhaps the housemaid may confirm it. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps. Yet I wonder, monsieur, if your elegant shoes bear traces of cellar dust. For the first time, Blakely's composure wavered. He glanced down swiftly at his polished leather boots, then smiled again, more tightly. If you mean to accuse me, Poirot, do so outright. Otherwise, I shall take a stroll in the garden for some fresh air. He departed, his cane tapping briskly on the tiles. Hastings muttered, The man's a bounder, Poirot. I'd swear he's hiding something. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Oh mon ami. But whether he hides the clock, or merely his own secrets, we must determine. Clara's distress. Later, as Poirot ascended the grand staircase, he encountered Clara Vane. She clutched a letter in her hand, her face pale. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, she said in a rush, I beg you, do not tell Lady Winthrop what you suspect of me. She trusts me. If she believed I could steal from her, it would break her heart. Poirot bowed gallantly. Mademoiselle, calm yourself. I accuse no one without proof. But perhaps you will confide in me. This letter you hold, it is from your suitor, is it not? Clara hesitated, then nodded faintly. Yes. He is desperate for money. He urged me to find a way. But I swear I never touched the clock. Poirot regarded her steadily. I believe you speak truth, mademoiselle. Yet remember, sometimes one may be used as a pawn, unknowingly. Guard your heart, and your pen. She fled quickly down the corridor, leaving Poirot with furrowed brow. Mrs. Dawes and the study. Before dinner, Poirot slipped once more into the study where the theft had occurred. There, to his surprise, he found Mrs. Dawes polishing the mantel with vigour. Ah, Madame Dawes, Poirot said softly. Still keeping the study immaculate, even after the crime. She looked up, startled. It is my duty, sir. Dusk gathers quickly in these old houses. Poirot's eyes rested on her cloth. And yet you polish here, though no one uses the room now. Is it loyalty or guilt? Her eyes flashed. How dare you? I'd never lay a finger on that clock, save to guard it. Poirot inclined his head, unruffled. Then you have nothing to fear, madam. But remember, the more one guards a treasure, the more one draws attention to it. He left her bristling, but not without noticing the faint tremor in her hands. Poirot reflects. That night, as they retired, Hastings burst out, Well, Poirot, what did we truly learn today? A scratched lock, an empty crate, and a whiff of varnish. It's precious little to solve a case upon. Poirot sat serenely, folding his silk dressing gown. On the contrary, Hastings. It is everything. The lock tells us the thief is no stranger. The crate tells us the clock was hidden nearby. And the varnish tells us the clock has been altered, perhaps disguised, perhaps disassembled. Think, Hastings, if one cannot remove a clock, one may change its appearance so it is not recognized. Hastings gaped. Disguised? You mean it could be under our noses all along? Poirot's moustaches twitched with satisfaction. Exactment. The horologe of Orleans still ticks within these walls, Hastings. And when the moment is right, Hercule Poirot shall reveal it. He extinguished the lamp with precision, leaving Hastings wide awake, pondering wildly what disguise a clock could possibly wear. Chapter 7 The Net Tightens. The following morning found Winthrop Hall taut with tension, like a bowstring drawn too tight. Servants moved in quick, nervous steps, while Lady Winthrop's usually serene breakfast table dissolved into silence broken only by the clink of spoons. Everyone avoided each other's gaze. It seemed to Hastings that suspicion hung heavier in the air than the scent of bacon. Poirot, immaculate in grey suit and shining patent shoes, surveyed the room as though it were a theatre. His eyes lingered on each face, Roland restless and pale, Clara anxious and withdrawn, Blakely charming but a shade too composed, Mrs. Dawes stiff with disapproval. When breakfast concluded, Poirot rose gracefully. Mesdames et messieurs, I require a little of your time today. There are matters I must put before you all, matters concerning the horologe. The effect was immediate. Roland spilled his coffee, Clara turned white, Blakely raised his brows, and Mrs. Dawes stiffened still further. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, you react, each of you. That is well. For soon, the truth must out. Poirot's quiet plan. Later, in the seclusion of the library, Hastings confronted him. Dash it all, Poirot, you'll frighten the whole household to death. Why tell them you're close to the truth when you're not ready to name the culprit? Poirot spread his hands. Because, Hastings, the guilty one is like a mouse. Corner him, and he will run. Today, I lay the cheese. Hastings looked baffled. Cheese? OUI, mon ami. A trap. By speaking of the horologe, I increase the pressure. The thief grows restless, desperate. And desperation, Hastings, produces mistakes. We shall be watching. Roland's outburst. The first mistake came before luncheon. Roland burst into the library, his cheeks flushed. Poirot, he cried, I demand you tell my aunt I've nothing to do with this. She looks at me as though I were Judas. I may have debts, but I'm no thief. Poirot gestured for calm. Sit, Monsieur Roland. You protest too strongly, perhaps. Roland slammed his fist on the desk. Too strongly? What else am I to do? Everyone suspects me. If you've any sense of honor, clear my name. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Patience, monsieur. Soon all will be clear. Tell me, do you know of an empty crate in the cellar? Roland blinked. Crate? No, of course not. I've not been near the cellars. Poirot studied him closely. The young man's anger seemed genuine, but whether born of innocence or fear, Hastings could not tell. Clara's confession. That afternoon, Clara approached Poirot privately. She looked worn and drawn, her hands trembling around a folded letter. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, I must confess something. My friend in London begged me to find money. He hinted that I might take something from the hall. But I swear, I never agreed. I only pretended to consider it, to keep his affection. You must believe me. Poirot bowed gravely. I believe, mademoiselle, that you are honest now. But you see how dangerous is the path of secrecy. Even if you did not steal, another might use your hesitation to throw suspicion upon you. Her eyes filled with tears. Do you think he, my friend, could have arranged this theft himself? Poirot gave a slight shrug. Perhaps. Or perhaps he is but a shadow in the game. Courage, mademoiselle. The truth comes soon. Blakely unnerved. Toward evening, Poirot encountered Blakely in the smoking room. The dealer sat polishing his cane, but his hand trembled faintly. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, he said lightly, you cause such agitation. Might I suggest you reveal your solution quickly, before the entire household collapses under suspicion? Poirot's moustaches twitched. You are impatient, monsieur? Why so, unless you feel the noose tighten? Blakely laughed, a little too loudly. Nonsense. I am merely amused. But if you wish to know, I had a wire this morning from my office. A client demands an item of particular rarity. I should like to leave for London at once to attend him. Poirot's gaze sharpened. So eager to leave? And yet the horologe, worth far more than any trinket, is here a-missing. Tell me, monsieur, would your client be interested in such a piece? Blakely rose, his smile still fixed but his colour slightly off. I think, Poirot, that you enjoy toying with me. But I assure you, I have neither seen nor touched that clock. If you will excuse me. He departed with a stiff bow, his cane striking hard on the parquet. Hastings muttered, if that fellow isn't guilty, I'll eat my hat. Poirot only shook his head. Patience, Hastings. The guilty man reveals himself not by protest, but by action. Mrs. Dawes under pressure. That night, after dinner, Poirot sought out Mrs. Dawes. He found her in the servants' corridor, directing the maids with her usual iron authority. Madame Dawes, Poirot said softly, you love this house. You would do anything to preserve its dignity, its traditions. She looked at him sharply. That I would. Lady Winthrop may sell her jewels if she pleases, but not that clock. It was the master's pride. Poirot's eyes glimmered. Even to steal it away, to keep it safe from sale. Her face hardened. "You insult me, sir. I may guard this house, but I would never dishonor my service with theft." Poirot inclined his head. "Then forgive me. But remember, madam, zeal may blind as surely as greed." For the first time, her composure cracked. Her lips trembled before she turned briskly away. Poirot sets the trap. That evening, in their chamber, Hastings found Poirot writing small notes in his elegant hand. "What's this, Poirot?" "Invitations, Hastings. Tomorrow evening, I shall gather everyone in the drawing room. There I will reveal the truth." Hastings stared. "But do you know the truth yet?" Poirot smiled, folding the notes neatly. "Almost. The pieces are arranged, the red herrings discarded. Only one step remains, to see how each reacts when the trap is sprung." "And what's the trap?" Poirot slipped the notes into envelopes. "I shall announce that the horror lodge has been found." Hastings sat up. "Found? But it hasn't been, has it?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Not yet, mon ami. But by declaring it so, I force the guilty hand. The thief will betray himself, by fear, by anger, or by action. Then, at last, Hercule Poirot will speak. The house holds its breath." As the household prepared for bed, word of Poirot's impending revelation spread swiftly. Roland was seen pacing the terrace in the moonlight, smoking furiously. Clara wept quietly in her room. Blakely retired early, but the servants whispered he did not sleep. Mrs. Dawes kept to her duties with rigid formality, her lips pressed thin. Winthrop Hall itself seemed to hold its breath, as though the ancient timbers and silent corridors sensed the coming storm. The air grew thick with expectation. Hastings, though weary, felt his pulse quicken. "By Jove, Poirot, tomorrow we shall have it out at last. But I can't imagine how you mean to pull it off." Poirot adjusted his silk nightcap with care. "You shall see, mon ami. The thief has been clever, too clever. He has hidden the clock not by distance, but by disguise. And when I reveal this, all the false trails will vanish like smoke." He extinguished the lamp with his usual precision. "Sleep well, Hastings. Tomorrow, the little grey cells will speak, and the horror lodge shall tick once more." Hastings lay awake long into the night, his mind racing. Who among them could be the thief? Roland, desperate and reckless? Clara, swayed by love? Blakely, smooth and secretive? Or Mrs. Dawes, fierce in loyalty? Each seemed guilty, and yet Poirot's calm suggested certainty. Outside, the moon rode high, casting silver over the silent lawns, while deep within the house the missing clock waited, hidden, for its final unveiling. Chapter 8 of Poirot Explains. The following evening, the drawing room of Winthrop Hall glowed with lamplight. Heavy curtains were drawn against the night, and the fire burned steadily. Every chair had been placed in a semicircle, facing the hearth where Poirot now stood, immaculate as ever, his moustaches gleaming. The household gathered uneasily. Lady Winthrop sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. Roland lounged restlessly in his chair, smoking despite his aunt's frown. Clara clutched a handkerchief, pale and anxious. Blakely leaned on his cane with studied composure, though his eyes flickered nervously. Mrs. Dawes stood at the back, lips tight, arms folded. Poirot surveyed them with grave courtesy. "Mesdames et messieurs, I thank you for your patience. You have endured suspicion, fear, and discord. Tonight, I shall end it. The horror lodge of Orleans has not left this house. It never crossed the gates of Winthrop Hall." A stir ran through the group. Roland sat upright. Clara gasped softly. Blakely's brows rose, and Mrs. Dawes muttered something under her breath. "Yes," Poirot continued calmly, the horologe remains among us. But it has been disguised, hidden in plain sight, while false clues led us astray. A broken gate, muddy footprints, rumors in the village, all red herrings to confuse. He let the silence stretch, then raised a finger. But the little grey cells, they are not so easily deceived. The elimination. Poirot turned to Roland first. You, Monsieur Roland, had motive. Your debts pressed hard, and you admitted them. Yet you also lacked subtlety. A man who pawns trinkets openly, with his aunt's consent, does not conceal a theft with cunning misdirection. You are reckless, yes, but not sly. You are innocent. Roland flushed crimson, half in relief, half in indignation. Poirot next faced Clara. Mademoiselle Vane, your suitor urged you to betray your mistress. You were tempted, but you did not act. Your tears, your honesty, convince me. You may be guilty of poor judgment in love, but not of theft. Clara covered her face, sobbing quietly, though Lady Winthrop laid a trembling hand upon her shoulder. Poirot's gaze shifted to Blakely. Monsieur Blakely, you, perhaps, seemed the most likely. A dealer, admiring the clock, writing letters of discreet sale. And yet you are too professional. You would not risk your reputation with clumsy footprints, broken gates, crude theatrics. You are a man of calculation, not rashness. Your guilt lies only in curiosity, not in crime. Blakely let out a long breath, though his lips remained pressed in a thin smile. Finally Poirot turned to the stern figure at the back. Which leaves Madame Dawes. You served this house 30 years. You loved it, guarded it, cherished it. But sometimes, Hastings, love can twist into obsession. Madame Dawes feared Lady Winthrop might sell the horologe, the last great pride of her late master. And so she took it. Not to profit, but to preserve. The disguise revealed. Gasps filled the room. Lady Winthrop half rose, her face stricken. Mrs. Dawes? No, I cannot believe it. Poirot raised a hand gently. Attend, madam. I shall explain. The clues speak clearly. The scratches on the cellar lock, the faint smear of oil, they were her work, to allow secret visits. The empty crate showed where she hid the clock temporarily. And the smell of varnish, that was the most telling. For she altered its appearance. He pointed dramatically to the corner of the room. There stood a tall wooden case, placed innocuously near the window, covered with a white cloth. Behold, Poirot said, stepping forward. He drew back the cloth with a flourish. A hush fell. The assembled company stared at what appeared to be a plain cabinet, polished recently, its lines heavy and square. Yet as Poirot touched a hidden catch, a panel slid aside to reveal the gilded dial, the delicate hands, the intricate mechanism. The horologe of Orleans, Poirot declared. Concealed within a cabinet of her own making, disguised with varnish and carpentry. Not removed from the house, but transformed before our very eyes. The confession. Mrs. Dawes' face went ashen. For a moment she stood rigid, then her shoulders sagged. Yes, she said harshly. I did it. I could not bear to see it sold, the master's clock, his pride. I thought if I hid it, Lady Winthrop would give up the idea. I meant no harm. Only to keep it safe. Lady Winthrop covered her mouth, tears spilling. Oh, Mrs. Dawes, why did you not trust me? I never intended to sell it. I only spoke of it in despair. I could never part with it. The housekeeper's eyes filled with tears, though she held herself stiffly. I feared words might turn to deeds. Forgive me, my lady. My loyalty blinded me. Poirot's final word. Poirot inclined his head. You see, Mesdames et Messieurs, the truth lies not in greed but in devotion. The red herrings, they were the work of Mrs. Dawes, meant to suggest an outside thief, to shield her from suspicion. But the little grey cells cut through illusion. Only one person loved the clock enough to risk all for it. That love, alas, became the very clue that betrayed her. He turned kindly to Lady Winthrop. "Madam, show mercy. The horologe is restored, no lasting harm done. Let the lesson be that love must not turn to secrecy." Lady Winthrop rose, her dignity returning. She placed a hand gently on Mrs. Dawes' arm. "You have served this house faithfully all your life. I forgive you. But promise me no more secrets." Mrs. Dawes bowed her head, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Peace restored. The room relaxed at last. Roland exhaled loudly, muttering something about being vindicated. Clara clung to Lady Winthrop's side, relieved beyond words. Blakeley chuckled softly, remarking that Poirot had provided him with the most diverting evening he'd had in years. Poirot, smoothing his moustaches, accepted their thanks with modest inclination. "It is nothing, Miss Amos. Order is restored, harmony returns. That is the task of Hercule Poirot." Hastings, later as they retired, shook his head in wonder. "You amaze me, Poirot. I'd have sworn it was Blakeley. But you saw through every trick." Poirot smiled serenely. "Because, Hastings, I ask always, who benefits most? Greed, revenge, desperation, they are loud motives. But love, love is quiet, stubborn, enduring. It leaves the smallest traces, but they are the most telling. In the end, love solved this case." He adjusted his pillow precisely, folding his hands. "And so, mon ami, the horologe ticks once more, and Winthrop Hall may sleep in peace." Hastings nodded, half in admiration, half in bewilderment. "Well, Poirot, I don't know how you do it, but I'm dashed glad you do." Poirot closed his eyes, a smile playing at his lips. "It is the little grey cells, Hastings. Always, always the little grey cells." The fire in the grate sank low, the great house settled into silence, and in its rightful place the horologe of Orleans chimed softly, restored at last, a symbol of loyalty, folly, and the brilliance of Hercule Poirot.